you have that mindset where you believe in yourself and you believe in your capabilities, even when you're backed into a corner, you will always come out fighting. And just because you cannot physically see your mind doesn't mean that you should not train it.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Your Mind in Sport podcast. My name is Gary Lavery and I'm super excited and privileged to be here with you again. In this episode, you will begin to explore some of the different ways of thinking about the one thing you have 100% control over your sports performance, and that is your language, or what we will call on this podcast, your language of the mind. So now, as you listen to the words I speak, just allow yourself to be open to all the new possibilities and positive ways you can resolve those performance problems that you are experiencing right now in your chosen sport. And I know you will open up your mind to what you are doing right now, and for whatever reason, you are doing it. And knowing this is super important. So why is language of the mind important to you as a sports performer? Well, one of the biggest detriments of sports performers developing and maintaining confidence is what type of language they choose to use behind the ears. Is it positive or is it negative? And when it comes to delivering a high performance, sporting champions have to remain positive about themselves and their ability to win. Their inner voice needs to be feeding them positive thoughts all the time about what they are about to do next. Former 400 metre champion Roger Black was certainly familiar with his inner voice, and Roger Black ran all over the world in Olympic Games and European Championships and up against some really tough, stiff competition. And he says, we all have a voice inside of our head and it speaks loudest to you when you walk into a stadium on your own. We don't listen to that voice most of the time, we shut it out. But there are certain moments in our lives when that voice will demand to be heard. One of those is when, as a sports performer, you stand on the line and that voice calls to you and you have to listen. If that voice is your friend, you're okay. If it's an enemy, have you ever been in a situation where your inner voice has actually dragged you down some deep and dark places mentally whilst you were in performance? Well, if so, you're no different to the millions of other sports performers around the world. One of my all-time favourite books on the subject of sports psychology is called The Inner Game of Tennis by Tim Galloway. And inside the book, Galloway says that it is the constant thinking activity of self-one, the ego mind, which causes interference with the natural doing processes of self-two. Harmony between the two selves exists when the mind itself is quiet. Only when the mind is still is one's peak performance reached. So from an NLP perspective, and this is something that we covered on episode 5 of Your Mind in Sport, is we said that as a human, we have two minds within our neurology. Our conscious mind, which is what Galloway referred to as self-one, and our unconscious mind, which is what he referred to as self-two. And here is another reason as to why learning about language of the mind is so important. And again, it comes from the book, The Inner Game of Tennis. And Galloway says that the greatest efforts in sports, they come when the mind is as still as a glass lake. So in other words, when you are left alone with just your own mind and your own fear, are you in charge of it? And when somebody turns up the pressure, can you deliver your best performance in the most intense and difficult situations? Maybe you play cricket or hockey or golf or tennis or some kind of sport where you hit a ball. Have you ever been in the zone where you're not thinking about how, when, or even where to hit the ball? You just seem to know without thinking? You have complete control over your thoughts, and if that voice inside your mind isn't supporting you, you need to replace it with one that does. I'm sure you already know this by now. From the best-selling book, The Secret by Rhonda Byrne, she says, when you focus your thoughts on something you want and you hold that focus, you are in that moment summarizing what you want from the universe. Thoughts become things. Now, if you think about your last sports performance, how did your thoughts sound inside your own head? Did they get you the result you wanted? Maybe you are really good at using language to help get you through some tough situations, similar to that of ex-England cricketer Robin Smith. To help feed his brain with positive information, he used imaginative language to convince himself and build confidence during sports performance. And Smith said, I became 3 times the player by getting my thinking right. When I talk to myself, I'm not always aware of what I'm saying, but I just know it keeps me going. I try to feed my brain positive information. As the bowler is walking back to his mark and I'm struggling, I try to imagine he's going to bowl a football rather than a cricket ball. It's a game I play in my mind. I try to picture him running up and bowling a juicy half volley or short one outside of the off stump, which I cut crisply for 4. And that helps my confidence for the next ball. So one of the things that we highlighted on the last episode was the brain does not know the difference between a real and imagined experience. So in other words, the brain responds to events which it thinks are real, whether they are or not. Now, Smith also gives an example in the book The Zen of Cricket by Tony Francis. And he says there's a long gap between Curtly Ambrose bowling one ball and the next. And when I'm struggling, I imagine the wicket to be more than 22 yards away. I do it by looking up and down the wicket and convincing myself that it stretches into the distance. It gives me that psychological advantage knowing that the ball can't come through so fast if it has further to travel. So what do we mean by language of the mind? Well, first of all, you must accept a simple definition of the word language, which is the method of human communication, either spoken or written, consisting of the use of words in a structured and conventional way. So what specifically do I mean by human communication? Well, in 1970, a professor called Ray Birtwistle conducted a study of human body motion communication. In other words, a study he terms kinesics in context, which revealed that all human communication, 100% of it, is made up like this. 55% is body language, facial expressions, breathing patterns, body posture, hand gestures. 38% is tonality, the pace of your voice, the pitch of your voice, the volume of your voice, the energy of your voice. And 7% is words, positive or negative, verbal, non-verbal, sensory words like look, sound and feel. And what this tells you is that 93% of human communication is unconscious. And if you think about the last episode of Your Mind in Sport, we actually said as an NLP premise that all learning, change and behaviour is done unconsciously. So what do we mean by that? Just to remind you, the stuff you are not conscious of until this gets brought to your attention. But to really open your mind up, think about this right now. You cannot not communicate. Meaning, if you say nothing, no verbal or non-verbal words, people will still be able to size you up from what they see. And one of my favourite quotes for body language in sport is that of former Australian cricketer Shane Warne, who once said, "When you turn up at the ground midway through a game, it should be impossible to tell from the attitude of the fielding team whether they are on top or behind. You should have to look on the scoreboard, not to see it on the field." Make sense? Now, let's just consider your spoken language. So the words you choose to say, either external to other people or internal to yourself inside your own headspace, all of which you have 100% control over. Now, from an external behavioural perspective, it's not what you say, but how you say it that really makes the difference. So to download from that, it's not the words that makes the difference, but it's how you use your tonality to say what you mean. And from an internal perspective, every thought of yours is a real thing. You are attracting things into your neurology, your thoughts, and building language around them. Consider this if you would. Research tells us you talk to yourself around 10,000 times a day, but how much of your language before, during, and after performance is positive or negative? For example, I once worked with a professional golfer who was not playing to his potential. His putting was excellent, but he had a problem teeing off when there was a visible rough on either side of the fairway. And he would invariably think to himself, "I mustn't slice my shot into the rough. That would be a disaster." And guess what often happened? He sliced into the rough. Now, nobody built that language pattern up inside of his head to actually think somewhat negative and be distracted by the rough in front of his eyes. He actually took 100% of that communication and was responsible for the output that he got. From NLP perspective, his brain made a picture and his hands made that picture come true. It didn't really matter whether the picture was not what he wanted, but what mattered was that the picture was there drawing his attention, and that influenced his body motion. So the words that we use inside of our own headspace are powerful. They shape how we think. But also, words are cheap, as the saying goes. They cost nothing, but they have the power to evoke images, sounds, and feelings. And they can motivate and demotivate you at will. And they can also change your emotional state. Come to think of it, consider some of the world's greatest speeches that have stood the test of time. For example, Martin Luther King Jr. with "I Have a Dream", Winston Churchill with "We'll Fight Them on the Beaches", or Al Pacino's speech in the film Any Given Sunday, "A Game of Inches". And all of those amazing speeches was delivered by one vehicle to get inside the mind of the listener and change their emotional state to somewhat of motivation or inspiration, to change their mindsets so they can believe in what the person was actually saying. And this was all developed by one thing: language. So how can we become more conscious of our language of the mind? So before we do this first exercise, I want you to agree with me that words have meaning. For example, if I said the word snow, you might say cold. Someone else might say white. And someone else might say Christmas, and so forth. Now, why is that? Well, what word of your vocabulary would best describe these words? Don't think about it. Just say the first word that comes into your head quickly. Are you ready? Sunshine, money, winning, pressure, ambition, respect, empowerment. Now, just one of the things that this exercise actually demonstrates is that no two people are the same, because one person could have a list of answers, another person would have a list of answers, so on and so forth, but to actually get 7 answers the same very rarely happens, unless they sit beside each other and they copy the answers down. But on a more serious note, I just want to drill down the fact that words have meaning, and also to extend with a quote from Tony Robbins, and he says that the meaning of communication is the response that you get from self and others. And as an action from that particular exercise, what I want you to do is just list all the key words that really push your motivational buttons. And when you have that list, shortlist it down to maybe 2 or 3 words that would absolutely drive you forward to get the very best out of yourself and your sports performance. Another really powerful exercise that you will want to do is called Thoughts Generator. Now, Thoughts Generator is easy and relaxing. And before I talk you through the process, I just want to remind you of the quote that I mentioned early on from Tim Galloway, which was, "The greatest efforts in sport, they come when the mind is as still as a glass lake." Now, only do this exercise when you are free from any distractions and that you are not driving. But just so you can get the very best experience and the most value from this exercise, what you need to do is find a room or an area without any distractions. And if you can set maybe 5 or 10 minutes aside and either sit on a chair or sit on the floor, that's your choice. And then close your eyes and simply stop and shut off your thoughts. Just stop thinking and focus only on your breathing, going in and out, in and out. And just see how long you can still your mind before your thoughts come back to consciousness. And when they do come back to consciousness, please analyze, are they positive thoughts or negative thoughts? And when they do, ask yourself the question, what is the one thing that I need to do now that would help me improve my language of the mind? And once you've done that, open your eyes and come back to now. So what if you were more in control of your language? How would this improve your future performance? Or what if you start to focus on your thoughts of what you really want? How would that improve your language of the mind? And finally, what if you use language to work for you and not against you? Would that build more self-belief or self-confidence? Well, all good things must come to an end, and this one just has. That is another episode of Your Mind in Sport complete. Thank you very much again for lending me your ears, and always remember that learning something is brilliant, but if you can actually put that into action and get a great result, which adds huge value to your sports performance, but also your life. And also, just to remind you, in the words of the great Yoda from Return of the Jedi, he said, "Do or don't, there is no try." So if you've tried to improve certain parts of your sports performance and you haven't gotten further, please think back to the language of the mind, delete the word try and input the word do. So there you go. There's no excuse now, is there? Also as well, if you have any feedback for this episode or previous episodes of Your Mind in Sport, then please do send that over. Send it over to Gary Lavery at nowtowow.com. yourmindandsport.co.uk, or if you are on LinkedIn, you can send me a message via that social platform. If you also want to connect with myself, please send me a request and I'll accept it, and we'll get that connection going from strength to strength. And also as well, if you are a sports performer or even a sports coach and you're looking for somebody who can add massive value from an NLP and sports mindset perspective, then we really do need to talk today. My number is 0191 300 0811. I look forward to hearing from you really soon. So let's get the wheels on that conversation moving forward as from now. And that's it for another episode of Your Mind in Sport. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you on the next podcast next week. See you soon. Bye for now.